All right. So let me start by just saying a little bit about my own experience with Gan Cao is that I don't actually like Gan Cao. I like it intellectually. I understand, and now I understand it even better doing all this research. I understand how important it is and how valuable it is and why it's in over 160 formulas in the Shanghan Lun and in the Jingui Yalue. But but yeah, I don't like it. So so it's just kind of a funny herb and so for me, and so I chose it really so I could do a deep dive into it and learn a little more about it. So what I started with in order to start this class was like we had some pieces of licorice root. I should have brought one with me to show it, but some pieces, not the cut licorice that we see in our formulas, but just like a piece of licorice root. And so I took that and was like, all right, I'm just going to eat it. And so I chewed on it for a little bit and like soaked it in water and then made tea out of it. And, kind of chewed on it a little bit to see what would happen. And the immediate thing you get, which is what we're going to talk about in this first section, is sweet. It is sweet. And Gan Cao is very sweet. It is the essence of sweet. And so you get this really like kind of burst of sweetness with like this tiny bit of bitter in the background, but very, very little of that bitter. It is mostly sweet. And then what happens really quite quickly when you eat it and also when you drink a cup of it is that you create more um, saliva. You actually create more fluids in your mouth. And that's the key to Gan Cao that we're going to see in many different ways with lots of different words here is that Gan Cao is sweet and Gan Cao delivers moisture. So those are the two big things that I'm going to talk about in all these different combinations that we're going to see Gan Cao in, and it's the key. So one interesting thing about Gan Cao that I didn't know is that it's produced mainly in the north of China, in the very north of China, which is kind of like frozen tundra. And you can see on the next slide, I've got a picture of this kind of like frozen earth. And that's where Gan Cao grows. So I put this quote in here that tells us a little bit about how Gan Cao is grown and how it grows in this very cold place. And this is from an article in The Lantern by Will Survels. And he says, he's talking about this scholar, Zhang Zhichong. Zhang argues that the real function of Gan Cao is to more or less pump fluid from the middle burner into the network vessels and channels. In his vivid analysis, Zhang Zhichong invites us to consider the licorice plant itself, which grows in the extreme dryness of the northern deserts of China and plies deep into the earth, deftly capturing and containing the moisture, rooting out the slightest traces of moisture, and then pumping it up into the stems and branches. This process is not unlike the middle burner, like the spleen, which captures fluids that are coming into us through this digestive tract conveyor belt route and captures fluids and diffuses it then through all the vessels and channels and collaterals. So I find this fascinating, right? I didn't know anything about how the plant grows and how the plant draws moisture from a very cold, dry place and creates moisture and spreads it into itself. So this is telling us that Gan Cao brings water and allows water to spread so that something can grow. And that's the next thing that we're going to talk about Gan Cao is that Gan Cao makes things grow in a good way, right? So a couple more ways of looking at the actions and the functions of Gan Cao. So in the Shenrong Ben Cao Jing, it says, the qi and flavor are sweet, neutral, and non-toxic. It governs the 5 viscera and the 6 bowels. Cold and heat and evil qi hardens the tendons and bones, grows the flesh, doubles the qi and strength, governs incised wounds with swelling, and resolves toxins. When taken over a long period of time, it lightens the body and prolongs life. This sounds very familiar to our modern actions, which we'll look at in the next slide. Chen Xiuyan says, of the substances with a sweet flavor, arriving at Gan Cao is the ultimate. Sweet governs the spleen. The spleen is the root of later heaven, and the 5 viscera and the 6 bowels all receive the qi. When the spleen qi flourishes, then the 5 viscera are able to circulate and receive benefit, and all the viscera are able to receive the fortifying, promoting, and multiplying effects. When the spleen receives supplementation, the flesh is naturally filled. So we're going to talk a little bit more about what it means that Gan Cao builds the flesh. Right? Remember, the flesh is the tissue of the spleen. All right, so in our modern materia medica, that language is condensed down to these functions, right? So Gan Cao is sweet and neutral. It goes to all 12 channels, but it focuses on the heart, the lung, the spleen, and the stomach. And we see that with its actions and how it works on the body. And we know it tonifies the qi. We know that it moistens. And I think that sometimes these actions really they lessen some of the functions, because what I really want to focus on is the moistening aspect of Gan Cao. And here it's just like moistens the lungs and stops cough, but really Gan Cao moistens the yin of the body in a very deep way. It's not just the lungs, it's all the yin. It does have a certain affinity for the lungs and the throat, but Gan Cao, when we think of yin, we want to expand our understanding of yin to be not just water, but also things of substance, right? So that includes, the bodily form, the flesh of the body, the yin, the blood. And Gan Cao, depending on how we use it and what formulas and what combinations, builds the yin substance of the body, not just moistens the lungs. So we really want to expand these functions a little bit. Moderates spasms and alleviates pain. We'll talk about how it does that and what combinations it does that in. Clears heat and resolves toxicity. This was always a function that kind of had me confused for a long time. And so I want to talk about that. Like, how can an herb that's sweet and neutral clear heat or resolve something so hot that it's toxic? Right. So we'll talk about that. And then we'll talk a lot about its moderating and harmonizing effects and how it really takes on the role of earth in a formula, just like earth takes on this moderating, harmonizing role within the movements of all the other phases and organs. Hi there. Thank you so much for watching this clip of my class. I'm Suzanne Connole. I'm a White Pine Circle teacher, student, and board member. If you want to watch the rest of this class, I urge you to upgrade to the inner circle of the White Pine Circle, where you can get access to over 350 resources, CEU classes, and you also get access to these incredible forums that are expert teacher moderated forums where you can ask clinical questions, ask advice, look for help, and also learn a lot in those forums. And most importantly, while joining the inner circle, you get to be part of this growing community of committed East Asian medicine students, teachers, and practitioners. So please join us in the inner circle. Looking forward to seeing you there.